Good evening and welcome to the fourth episode of Leadership Conversations in the Development Sector. The social impact sector is full of passionate leaders with innovative outlooks on the world's greatest problems. Our leadership conversations focus on the unique insights offered by these leaders as they share their experiences and move the development sector forward. Our host, Go Barefoot, is an interactive web portal dedicated to the social sector. It brings together individuals, NGOs, NPOs, and CSR arms of organizations with the mandate of creating a one stop information website for both networking and knowledge sharing. We are supported by Catalyst, an NGO which has been preparing young women for leadership roles to create equality in opportunities and bridge the gender gap. Also, we are supported by Third Sector Partners, India's only executive search firm exclusively for the development sector. Our guest today is one of the leading lights in the development sector. I would like to extend a warm welcome to Alkesh Wadhwani, Director, Poverty Alleviation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Alkesh leads the Poverty Alleviation portfolio for the Foundation's India Country Office, which comprises programmatic work in agriculture, development, water, sanitation and hygiene, financial services for the poor, and gender equality. He joined the foundation in India in 2003 and was one of the key members who helped conceptualize and implement the $338 million funded Avhan program, the AIDS initiative of the world's largest HIV/AIDS prevention programs. Before joining the foundation, he worked for McKinsey. He has also worked in the financial institutions group of Citibank in Mumbai. His educational background includes a BTech in Electrical Engineering, IIT Mumbai, and MBA from IIM Calcutta in Finance and Systems. In conversation with Alkesh is Shital Kakkar Mehra, leadership expert and executive presence coach for CEOs. Sheetal has coached several hundred CXOs in the past decade and has conducted workshops for diverse organizations across Asia. She has been invited as a speaker by leading B schools and professional associations. She is a best selling author, and her latest best selling book on executive presence is India's first research based formula on executive presence. Sheetal is an active philanthropist and social entrepreneur. Thank you, Sheetal and Alkesh, for joining us today. I would like to now hand it over to you, Sheetal. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
Sakshi.
Sakshi. Welcome to the session, Alkesh. We are honored and it'll be wonderful interacting and hearing your views on the development sector. So I'm going to ask you my first question. You started your journey in the corporate sector with Citibank and McKinsey. What excited you to transition to the development sector?
So, Sheetal, I think while I was in McKinsey itself, I knew I wanted to join the nonprofit sector. I worked in McKinsey for 5 years. And out of that, I spent about 2.5 years doing nonprofit uh, engagements. That's not normal. I mean, everyone does one or two, but spending 50% of your time in nonprofit while in a profit firm is unusual. And I think I always knew at the back of my head, finally, I wanted to join the nonprofit. And I think that I got this opportunity. I was very happy about it. And what drove me really was the fact that I live in Bombay. It's a city of huge disparities, huge disparities. I was luckily in a place where I was earning a reasonable amount and I felt I had some savings. And every time I step out of my building, I just look at the disparities and found it really tough to live with it. So at some point I said, now I've spent 5 years here, I want to join the nonprofit, and that's what I did.
Amazing. So it was your passion for the sector and the initial interactions that you had in your job. So that's now, the NGO sector in India has significantly changed and evolved. And you have seen the evolution in the last 1 or 2 decades almost. So how do you think that leadership has evolved to rise to this challenge?
Right. So, Yes, I have been here for a long time. I started in, as you mentioned, in 2003. And when I look at the programs that I would be involved in then and now, the programs might be similar. But I think the main difference is uh, the the non-profit sector. I'll make 2 points. The non-profit sector has grown, and more people have got more and more experience. So the scale of the programs being handled are bigger and bigger. And I think just more and more people are experienced. You've got more leaders who've come either grown from the nonprofit itself or who have come from other sectors. So you can see that growth clearly happening. The second point I'll make is that as a foundation, we work and support 80-90% of our programs are supporting government programs. And I see the same switch there. So the switch there is not really in terms of scale. The program, um, governments always had large scale programs, but I think the ability to deliver has changed drastically. I mean, today's officers and staff who run government programs know how to actually execute well, see that things are working. And again, I think it's driven apart from experience by the fact that politically the landscape has changed drastically. I think 18-20 years back, uh, it wasn't so important for a political party to demonstrate development and to show that programs have reached the ground and so on. Uh, Perhaps as important or more important 20 years back was, caste-based, identity-based politics. I'm not saying that has disappeared. It's still important, but it's equally important today to show that you've delivered development. So the pressure on bureaucrats and government to deliver is much, much, much more. And they're always saying, what is new? What can we do? How can we deliver? So, and in a way, government is also non-profit, right? I mean, it's not a profit sector. So I see the same change there. And in a way, the change is a reflection of society. Society has changed over the last 20 years. Society has, one, become richer, of course, in India too. But equally important, I think all of us are more educated, so the expectations are much more, aspirations are much more because of TV and so on. So it's a reflection of society. I feel that the change has come in the NGO sector and the government. The last point I'll make on society's changing is that even the corporate sector, what it was, say, in 1947 when we got independence, of into 20 years back, it was much smaller. Now the size of the companies are so large that, again, this is a reflection of how society is changing. Government and NGOs also change with society.
Superb. So yes, I agree with you completely. And India has done well, and that's amazing. So I'm going to keep the thread of the leadership going. So what do you think are some of the shortcomings of the leaders that you see in the development sector, and how do you feel that they can work towards plugging that gap?
Right, right. So, I'll perhaps, rather than use the word shortcoming, I'll just say how it's different from what it could potentially be. So, one is our sector, the NGO sector or the non-profit sector of which I'm a part. It is very small relative to either the government sector or the for-profit sector, right? So as a result, the kind of experience that, say, I would have, or others in my or any or in the sector would have, would not offer the same scale typically that would be offered in either government or the for-profit sector. So, for example, the large companies in India, whether it's Reliance or Tata's, the size and scale of, or any of the other large companies, the size and scale you are dealing with is pretty humongous, right? And yes, Gates Foundation is a large player, but the size and scale is smaller relative to the large programs, the large companies that the private sector run. And if you run a larger company, you have more experience, you have diverse experience, you have different experience. For example, I think I was reading yesterday or day before just an article in the newspaper which said that Tata, TCS recruited 20,000 odd people this quarter, right? And it was the highest ever. So, you extrapolate, you're recruiting 100,000 people. Now, if you're recruiting 100,000 people, then the processes you have to put in place and the challenges you face are very different than if the NGO you are working with, if it's large, it has 1,000 people or 5,000 people, right? If to recruit 100,000 people, they must be getting, I don't know, million, 2 million applications which they have to screen. To screen 2 million applications, they have to have AI systems to deal even with applications. You can't be interviewing 2 million people. So it's just a different ball game. So you don't get that exposure that you would get there. So I think this is one difference that one has to accept and realize. On the flip side, a typical company has to focus on a very small and identified set of things to execute against their program, right? So if you're building some widget, you're building a, even, I mean, let's not take complex things like aeroplanes, but say suppose you're building a, say, pump, right? And you're selling pumps, right? There are large companies in India that sell pumps. Fine, you have, suppliers which, and you have to get them together. You need, of course, you need a good supply chain, you need a good manufacturing process, and then you need to sell it, right? But in the non-profit, you deal with much more than that, and you deal with huge number of stakeholders that you don't have to worry about in the for-profit sector. You have to deal with a whole set of socio-economic issues that you don't have to deal with in the for-profit sector. So yes, at that level, you do get a broader exposure on how society works. So I would say you have pros and cons on these two sides of on what a leader in the non-profit has to deal with versus what a leader in the for-profit has to deal with.
Super, wonderful to hear that. So how does your organization proactively help, develop potential leaders? Some of the measures of, practices or some possibly programs that they participate in. So how, because you have grown extensively in the last few years and have a lot of several now people who have taken over leadership positions internally.
Right. So, I'm not too sure whether to answer the question of how internally as people in Gates Foundation, we have grown, or how we encourage growth in organizations we fund. So perhaps I'll focus on the second question. And there is this, I don't know what it's called. I think HR person says some 70-20-10 rule or something, that 70% of growth or learning has to come from on the job, right? And then it's 20 and 10, and maybe that 10 is classroom training. So I think the biggest training in a way that leaders in organizations we fund get is because the scale of our funding typically is large, and that forces that program to deal with lots of challenges and uncertainties and scale and so on, right? So some of our programs, they are large in two ways. Either nearly all our programs are supporting government, and government programs are very large. So it's how do you move those large programs of government to make it, to work with them, to help them define it, to in terms of what are the goals, what are the processes, how to make systems better, make it more efficient, make it more effective. So think of it as that the organizations we fund are consulting to government, like any consulting firm, and providing some execution support. So I think that itself forces the organizations we fund to grow, for the leaders to grow, because suddenly they are supporting programs that are in 10,000 villages, 50,000 villages, and so on. The second is the teams that often, not always, the teams that we fund are large, of the organizations that support government. So this is not always the case, but if I take one example, say in Bihar, right? In Bihar, where we have had a large health program for a decade, our team might have had, I don't know, 5,000 of, not our team, let me be more specific. The organization we funded would have 5,000 people supporting government. Now that might seem big, but the program the government program that is supported has typically 100 to 200,000 people. So you don't have a lot of people to support the government, right? And maybe 200,000 people. If you add the two departments we were working with, which is health and WCD or whatever, women and child development. So teams leading 5,000 itself, the leaders grow, right? Because typically the NGOs are smaller. They use this to grow their skills, their staff, etc., get more specialized. So I think the bulk comes from just them suddenly leading larger programs over years, and that gives them the experience to think about systems, big changes, etc. So I would say that's the primary way we help the ecosystem get leaders formed. So if I have to step back, I would say, if not today, say 20 years back or 15 years back, not all, many of the leaders came from uh, India's polio program that WHO led. Right? It's called NPSP. I mean, it's now not there in such a large scale because India has achieved polio elimination.
Yes.
But those people who were the leaders and who helped India achieve elimination of polio went in to lead many programs because they got a lot of training from a WHO, and in turn they knew how to run large scale programs, knew how to do large scale surveillance, etc., do it systematically, have the best knowledge in the field, and so on. And they went on to oversee many health programs in the country, including going back to government, because many of these leaders were from government. And we were part funders of that program in PSP. The program that I at one point led, which I think was referred to earlier, the HIV/AIDS program, similarly was a pretty large program where we funded lots of organizations to run HIV program. That was called Avahan. And again, because these were large scale programs, and it kind of built the field and in a way encouraged a set of practices to be methodical, to be process driven, and yet care about impact, etc., to be data driven. And I saw that a lot of the leaders there went on then to lead organizations in health across India in the non-profit sector. So that has been my experience of how leaders are built. But coming to us, the second point, right? This is on the job, and like we all accept as more than just on the job. So we do, but this is in a small way. We do have organizations we fund to provide some sort of leadership training development, I would call, to other organizations we fund. So for example, we funded Dasra, whose goal it is to work with other partners of ours to look at communications and other aspects that will help develop leadership. So yeah, this is roughly the way.
Thank you. So still staying on the leadership track, you have more than almost 2 decades of experience in this sector, and you have seen it change, grow, evolve. Many of we have several young professionals today in our audience who would love to hear from you that what is your piece of some advice to the rising stars of the development sectors, people who are in their late 20s, early 30s, and possibly have 3 decades of career ahead of them. So what advice would you like to give them?
So that's a tough one, right? I think everyone, I mean, if I have to say one thing, is that it really is great if you can follow your passion, right? Because the amount you can get done just by following your passion, if you're passionate about something, I think exceeds anything else that a job can teach you or trainings can teach you. So as long as you follow your passion, I think a lot can happen. The second I would say is that it is worth thinking about switching, not being stuck to only one thing, and switching roles either in your own organization or looking at different organizations, so that you are not following only one track. Now, of course, there are people who've succeeded following only one track, and founders of large companies have done that, whether it's Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, etc. But I think that may not be the norm. So I think if you are in a company which is not huge, if you are in a huge company or a huge NGO, yes, you can move within that NGO and go get experience in different roles. But if you're not, I think it's worth getting experience in either different roles, in terms of, say, first you are, say, doing MIS or MLE in NGO sector, monitoring and evaluation. At some point, you're a program officer. At some point, you're looking at communications. So I think having some breadth of knowledge in that way is useful, and also having some breadth of knowledge across sectors in terms of verticals. So for example, if you're working in sanitation, you might choose to say that, look, okay, I have spent 7-8 years. Let me see if you feel passionate about it, that, look, I want to work in climate change or health or education or whatever. And the reason I say this is that I think a lot of ideas come from having a broad breadth of knowledge and having exposure to different ways of how things work, and being able to apply it from one sector to another, or being able to apply it across functions. And I think most, at least this is what I've read, a lot of innovations come from people who are new to the sector and have never been in the sector, right? So yeah, the example, of course, is, Elon Musk. What does he know about rocket science? Uh, but he's beaten all the other companies to it, right? Because he's from some other sector. So I think having this kind of, so I think having this kind of cross exposure is useful. So I'll say these two things.
So thank you. I'm sure young professionals in the audience would greatly benefit from that. Now, with the current COVID situation, we see a lot of grants being made to the health program. Of course, we are delighted to share with you, share with the audience that the Gates Foundation is the second largest donor of the century. And of course, it's a matter of great honor and pride that Jamshedji Tata Trust, of course, has been the #1 donor in the past century. So now in the post-COVID era environment, what do you see are the changes in the development sector? Even something connected to possibly non-health thematic areas, or generally, what do you see how will post-COVID era, things will change, or your view on it?
So, what I see, which is, I think everyone is likely to accept it, is, again, it's a reflection of the larger world, is that, we are talking right now over Zoom. And that really is the reality, that digital is going much more viral, or getting much more acceptance than it did in the past. And that is clearly a big change. It's not happened only in the for-profit world, or it happened also in the non-profit world and in government. I can give you many examples. For example, we did one, and this is just one example, we did one training for government where health supported them, where they had 1.5 lakh frontline workers over a Zoom call, right? We didn't realize that you could get that kind of scale, but we did. So this is just one example, but I see more and more acceptance. Now, a lot of our training with government frontline staff is digital. Earlier, it was much, much less, right? And these are big changes. Similarly, meeting with government officials. Before COVID, I think in 18 years, I did not have one meeting with a government official on Zoom, or on on the phone, or any non-face-to-face interaction. But now it seems to be accepted. And all these are huge, I think, productivity drivers. Because you don't have to spend time traveling, you can fix up a meeting more easily, etc., etc. So I think the biggest change, like in the rest of the world, is the growth of
technology.
Digital. Yeah.
Super. Wonderful. So my final question, and then of course we'll take some questions from the audience, that how do you personally continue to grow and develop yourself as a leader? So if you can share some tips and tricks with our audience, that will be nice.
Yeah. So I'm not sure I'm growing at the pace that I was earlier, and that worries me. And that's, I don't know, maybe I'm just growing too old. So you can see I'm white and so on. So, maybe one or two things that I do. So one is, I do read a lot, and that's gone down in the last 1 year. So I would travel literally every week once at least. So that meant 4 hours on the flight. So I was reading 4 hours on the flight beyond my work. So that was, and I think that's my theme, that one needs to get a broader experience than just the work you're doing. So I would typically spend my flight time reading stuff which either non-fiction or even fiction. And one should not, 70-80% of my reading is non-fiction. But one should not discount fiction. It's as important. So actually the data says that, if you want to be creative, you really should read fiction, because fiction gives you ideas. And you never know. Yeah. So you just don't know where, you just need to be a broad thinker, I think, to bring new ideas to the table. And the more you read, the better. The second is that there's this huge tendency or rut if you worked in a job long enough to think that you know the answers and there's a certain way that you will get outcomes. But the world changes and you are not in touch with the world, right? That's the challenge all of us, at least if you've been working long face. So there is, I think, no substitute to being in the field and looking at different programs. I I have the opportunity to do that, right? Because it's not that, okay, I'm working for one NGO, so I have to only see what that NGO is doing. Since we work with a whole set of NGOs, I have that luxury of being able to either talk to different NGOs and or to understand their programs and or go to the field. So it has to be a combination of talking and going to the field because, I mean, again, you can't substitute the field with just hearing people. So I think that's the second thing. Uh, these, I think, would be the two most important. The thing I feel made me very happy, but if I take a career view, was not the best thing to do, was that I spent a lot of time in one field, right? So I ran or whatever, was involved in the HIV program for 10 years. And I went more and more into detail in that program and finally was running it for a few years. So that doesn't give you the breadth that you would get if you changed a bit. So that's why I'd encouraged others to, change, to see if they want to look at different things and not only be stuck in one thing. But who knows what's the right thing? So, for example, it's a trade-off, right? Maybe my career would be better if I didn't spend 10 years in one program. But in terms of satisfaction, that gave me the most satisfaction. So would I change what I did? No. Because being there for 10 years allowed me to see the whole evolution of the program, take it to conclusion, because these programs are pretty large, and if you're trying to have impact in a country as large as India and say, okay, I'm looking for impact and I'm looking to hand it over and transition it so that it's sustainable to the government, it's nearly impossible to do it in less than a 10-year period. So yeah.
Superb. So we have a couple of questions. We have Anjali Patil from Third Sector Partners who would like to ask a question. She just messaged. So yes, Anjali, may I request you to, yeah, super, wonderful to see you.
Thank you, Shital. Hi, Alkesh. It's been
Hi.
listening to you today. So at Third Sector Partners, Alkesh, in the last 16 years, we've had advised and successfully transitioned over 80 crossover candidates from the corporate sector. So when we interact with candidates wanting to make that switch to the development sector, their ambition is to work with BMGF for obvious reasons. So my question to you is, what would be your advice to the candidates, especially the ones who want to shift from the corporate side and aspiring to work with BMGF? So what would be your advice to these crossover candidates?
Right. So just some background, right? We have grown as an organization from literally 2-3 people when we started in 2003, and right now we are some 70-80 people. And 70-80 may not sound like a lot, but for a funding organization it is very large. So we don't see ourselves growing much more. I think we've peaked in terms of where we want to be, because earlier we looked at one sector, right? For 10 years we ran only a HIV program, and then we expanded to mother and child health and so on. And now we are kind of covering every possible area that our foundation works on, and that's the reason we've kind of peaked in terms of where we feel we need to be. So I just wanted to give this background to the folks listening in. So the kind of folks we take, the bulk are pretty experienced, right? Most of them have 10 plus years of experience, at least, I don't know, half to 1/3 have 20 plus years of experience. And we have a few people who have 2-3 years of experience. Those are the associates, but they'll be like maybe 5 in an organization of 80. So we are looking for the second thing I'd say in terms of background really is that apart from the fact that we plateaued out, is that we are now more specialized than we were 20 years back. So we are now looking more and more for specialists who have experience in the areas we work in. That is agriculture, sanitation, financial inclusion, and gender, and health. These are the 5 big areas we work in. So we are looking for specialists who understand the areas we work in. For example, if we recruit someone in TB, that person should have, 5-10 years of experience in TB at least, have relevant experience with large scale programs, etc. So in every area now, we are looking for specialization. And as long as I think you're specialized and we feel that, look, you've done a good job, that's really the skill set we're looking for.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. We have a second question from Purvi Shah of Catalyst. Yeah, Purvi.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to, yeah. Okay, yeah. Hi, Alkesh. It was really interesting to listen to your thoughts, especially about leadership, because leadership and especially women leadership is very close to my heart and our organization's vision. So our vision is to create equality in opportunity and leadership, and we work with the young women in professional education to prepare them for leadership roles. So my question to you is, since gender is also part of your portfolio, my question to you is, what is BMGF doing, and what can organizations do to create more equal opportunities for women and create more women leaders and opportunities for them to take up that leadership?
Right. So we are doing, at a broad level, we work in 2-3 areas in gender equality. One is, shining a light on the data, which highlights the inequalities so that people are aware of it and can take action against it, right? So the biggest barriers in gender inequality often come from, time use, which is, women have to do a lot of unpaid work, which includes work at home, etc. There are other barriers which would include, lack of infrastructure. For example, public transport is not good enough for women to reach work, it's not safe, and so on and so forth. So we do study these barriers. We do get data out on time use, on the difference, etc., so that people can act on it. Similarly, looking at pay scale differences, etc. But I think we'll all agree that while getting data is useful, it's not sufficient to actually drive change, right? But it's very important, because unless you can first point to the data, it doesn't really, you don't even know the difference. Now there's just so much data, at least in the Western world, and for example, pay parity differences. So we try to collect a lot of sex disaggregated data on each and everything, right? The second is, we have various programs to encourage women to be leaders. And I think roughly they are like scholarships or internships and so on and so forth. And I believe, because we've not yet brought that program hugely into India, but it started in the US, it's in 3 fields, which includes legal and 2 other fields, education, and a 3rd field where we are starting scholarships to encourage women leaders, because we feel in some of these fields, and the 3rd could, I'm not sure, it could be, for example, political or something. Not elected, obviously. That's not, you can't give scholarships for that. But I need to check which 3 fields.
Advocacy or something. Is it advocacy, policy, advocacy?
No, I don't think so. So it is like legal and 2 other areas. Because we feel if there are women leaders in these 3 areas, then that would really help. They could drive change in those sectors, and without change in those sectors, it's tough to really make change for women. And the 3rd area we work in, which is perhaps the largest, is on women's economic empowerment. So we feel that, except in a few countries, the data shows that if women are economically empowered, then they gain a lot of other empowerment, as opposed to saying, let us empower women so that gender-based violence comes down, etc. You work there as well. But if you empower women, they automatically get the social empowerment, which would include, for example, decision-making within households, etc. So we do a lot of work there. So these are 3 big areas that we work in gender.
Superb.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Alkesh. Thank you, Purvi. Sakshi, we have some questions from our listeners. So we have time for just one question. So, Sakshi,
Yes, Shital, yeah.
thank
Okay. So there are a few questions that we have from our audience. I'll try to read a few. So what tips would you give social sector leaders who want to re-engineer process and programs to include digital tools?
Uh, so, you know, there are lots and lots of apps out there, right? So it's pretty easy to make apps. But I think the challenge is not just to make the apps. So I think the answer is, you have to integrate and see how the apps get used. And like in the broader world, in a country like India, we know it's not about all digital. In a way, you have to make it phygital. So you have to see how that digital uh, works along with some human interface to drive the process to be better. That's, I think, the one learning I would call out. Uh, Perhaps the best example I can give you of this is UPI. So you and I may be transferring money either through Paytm or through UPI directly, uh, uh, which has now become pretty ubiquitous. But while people think it's ubiquitous, UPI is only used by 100 to 150 million people in India. So it's like 10% of the population, which is the rich population. But there's something called AEPS, Aadhaar Enabled Payment System. So what that does is if you've linked your bank account to Aadhaar, if you're not rich, the assumption is you won't have a smartphone. So if you're buying something from a store, there's a thumbprint reader which costs like pennies. I mean, like less than 100 rupees or few hundred rupees or even less. I'm not sure of the exact cost. You put your fingerprint there. So that's an Aadhaar enabled payments reader. Your bank account can be debited for the amount you bought. So that's an example of digital, right? You've got digital in the backbone. You've got a device there, but it's linked to an actual person there helping you use the device, and you're putting in the amount that needs to be debited without you needing a debit card or a credit card or anything. So I think that's my view. Yeah.
superb. One more question we have time for, Sakshi. So if you could.
Sure, sure. Okay, so the next question is, how do you think digital transformation will change the social sector?
So for me, the way it really changes the social sector is the ability to reach scale, right? That really is the big thing. The example I gave of 150,000 frontline workers of the government we went through with a Zoom call. Again and again we see that kind of thing happening. So that's how I think it can help to drive scales. That's how it can transform the social sector.
Thank you. Thank you, Alkesh. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing your insights on the development sector, and really appreciate, and I'm sure our audience have learned a lot from you. Of course, we have several questions, and we can forward some of them to you, and it will be great if you could answer them for us.
Sure.
And on that note, a big thank you to you, and a big thank you to our audience for joining us today. And stay safe, stay vaccinated, and looking forward to catching up for the next session. So thank you, Alkesh, and thank you to everybody.
Thank
Thanks a
you,
lot.
Peter, and thank you, Catalyst team. It's been a pleasure to be here and an honor, and thank you very much.
Thank you.